When the shuttle docked at Cathara's Base 7, on what the station calendar marked as the 43rd day of the third orbital cycle, I was in the middle of a combat calibration drill in the main training ring. We were running a 4-point defensive simulation, the kind where 4 opponents converge from cardinal angles, and you have to neutralize the threats in a specific order of priority without breaking pattern. I had run it 41 times that quarter. My best time was 6.2 seconds. The second best time in the cohort was 11.8, recorded by a Varani named Osik who trained twice as hard as anyone else and still couldn't close the gap. I wasn't thinking about the shuttle. I wasn't thinking about anything except the drill. The ring monitor, Instructor Foch, a squat, gray-skinned Mullorian with 4 eyes and a permanently tired expression, called a pause midway through my 40-second run. New enrollment. She didn't elaborate, she never elaborated. Cohort integration meeting, ring C, 40 minutes. That was it. I remember Osik glancing over at me from the sideline where he was stretching. He had these pale, compound eyes that couldn't really show expression the way human eyes could, but I had learned to read his posture after 2 years of training alongside him. He was curious, a little amused. Another Mullorian, he guessed. Probably a Varethian, said a cadet named Sallow from behind me. She was sallow even to her own people, a lanky Dreen female who specialized in navigation track and almost never came to combat drills voluntarily. She was there because Foch had made attendance mandatory for everyone in the top scoring tier. I heard the Varethian embassy submitted 4 names to the intake office last cycle. Doesn't matter, I said. And I meant it, I genuinely meant it. Whoever it was, they were a new enrollment. I had 22 months on them. The ranking gap would be what it was. I wasn't worried. I went to the meeting. I remember the ring. I remember the lighting, amber spectrum overhead panels, the kind that the Academy used in the C-block spaces because 3 different enrolled species required amber frequency for proper visual processing, and the administration had decided rather than install separate lighting per species, they just amber the whole block and let everyone else adjust. I remember the smell of recycled station air and the faint chemical sharpness of the cleaning compound they used on the ring floor. I remember 31 cadets standing in a loose semicircle. And then the door opened. I do not have a dramatic memory of that moment. I've heard people tell the story differently because it became a story people told, but for me it was just a door opening and a human walking through it. She was small. That's the first thing I registered. Not small by human standards. I learned later she was average height for a human female, about 1.7 meters. But in a room full of Thessari and Varani and Dreen and Mullorian, that translated to small. She had brown skin, dark hair pulled back tight against her skull, and she was wearing a standard-issue gray cadet uniform that she'd already modified at the wrists to allow something to ride in the cuff. I didn't know what yet. She looked around the room once. It was a very particular look. I've tried to describe it to people and I always fall short. It wasn't confidence exactly. It wasn't arrogance. It was assessment, like she was cataloging us, like she was already running numbers. Cadet Mara Voss, said Instructor Foch from the front of the ring. Human, specialty track, tactical operations and systems breach, prior placement, Frontier Guard, Sector 9, 26 months active. That got some attention. 26 months Frontier Guard was not nothing. The Frontier was genuinely difficult assignment, resource-constrained, politically complicated, the kind of posting where you solved problems with what you had rather than what was issued. Several cadets straightened slightly. She didn't react to any of it. She just looked around the room, finished her catalog, and then looked directly at me. I don't know how she knew I was the one to look at. She'd been in the room for 12 seconds. But she looked directly at me, held it for exactly long enough to register, and then looked away. I found out later, She'd read the public cohort rankings before she boarded the shuttle. Witness account, Cadet Osik Pren, Varani Male, Year 3. I was standing next to Dren when the human walked in. I want to be precise about what I observed, because I've heard the story get exaggerated in the retelling, and I don't think it needs exaggeration. She walked in, she looked around the room, she looked at Dren. Dren looked back. And then, and this is the part I've thought about many times, neither of them said anything. Nobody said anything. The room was quiet in a way rooms are not usually quiet when a new cadet arrives. New cadets usually get assessment murmuring, at minimum. Low-frequency social processing, species to species. This was different. I believe, in retrospect, that what happened in that room in those first 12 seconds was that Mara Voss established her presence, not through anything she did or said, through the particular quality of her attention. Humans are unusual that way. Many species process a room by broadcasting posture, pheromone sound. Humans process a room by watching. And when a human watches you, really watches you, it creates a very specific sensation that I can only describe as being seen more precisely than you intended. I felt it. I think everyone in the room felt it. Dren definitely felt it. He would deny that at the time. He denied it for weeks, actually. But I was standing next to him, and I know what I observed. His secondary manipulator appendages, the smaller pair at his torso, the ones Thesari use for fine manipulation, and which they instinctively retract when they're at ease, those were fully extended. Dren always retracted his secondary appendages in rooms he was comfortable in. They were extended the entire time Mara Voss was looking around the room. Personal log, Cadet Dren Valak continued. She was assigned Bunk 7 in Dormitory Wing B. I was in Wing A, which meant our paths wouldn't cross during sleep cycle. But the Academy's training schedule put all cadets above Year 2 into the same rotation for morning calibration, mid-cycle tactical review, and evening scenario assessment, which meant I would be in the same training spaces as her approximately 6 hours per day. I told myself this was irrelevant. She was new. She had a background, yes, but Frontier Guard service translated differently than Academy formal training. The gap between us in accumulated Academy methodology would be significant. I told myself that. I was also, that first evening, aware of a specific thing I had not expected to be aware of. I wanted to know what she'd been carrying in her cuff. I didn't find out what was in the cuff until the third morning. The first morning, she was assigned to the orientation track, the standard new enrollment processing that every cadet goes through regardless of prior experience. Foch ran her through systems familiarization, dormitory protocols, and the basic assessment battery. I knew because Foch told our cohort what new enrollments were doing on their first day, so we could adjust our training schedules accordingly. The second morning she was in early observation. She sat out from active training and watched. Again, standard protocol. You watch before you do. You learn the rhythm of a space before you enter it. I was aware of her watching. I was in the combat ring running individual scenario work, and I was aware, which was, itself, unusual. I do not typically register observation during active training. I focus on the task. But I registered her. It made me run a cleaner drill than usual, which is an embarrassing thing to admit but probably relevant. The third morning, she was cleared for active participation. Foch brought her into the morning calibration group, 11 of us, the top-tier cohort rotation, and told her to observe the first cycle and participate in the second. She observed the first cycle standing at the ring's edge, arms crossed, the cuff of her left sleeve pulled down slightly in a way that I had not previously seen a cuff pulled, like there was something in there that needed occasional checking. The second cycle, Foch called a 2-on-2 scenario drill. Pairs were assigned by board rotation. I was paired with Osik, as usual. Mara Voss was paired with a third-year Dreen cadet named Fossick. Fossick was decent, mid-tier for year 3. His primary advantage was speed. Dreen musculature gave him acceleration that most species couldn't match in short bursts. The scenario was a standard breach and clear. 2 pairs, opposing teams, one team defending a central object while the other attempted retrieval. I had run this scenario so many times I had lost count. What I had not seen was how Mara Voss ran it. She and Fossick were on the retrieval side. I was defending with Osik. The drill started. Mara Voss walked. Not moved, not advanced. Walked, steady pace, eyes tracking. And while I was processing that because it was unexpected, because tactical approach in retrieval scenarios favors speed and she was doing the opposite, she was also doing something with her left hand. She was reaching into her cuff. What came out of the cuff was small, black and white in coloring, possessed of 4 legs and a tail. It was a cat. She placed a small, biological earth organism, a cat, on the ring floor with the same calm demeanor she had brought into the intake room, gave it a single quiet word I couldn't hear across the ring, and the cat walked forward. The cat walked directly toward Osik, who had been positioned to my left as secondary containment. Now, I want to be clear about what happened next, because there is a version of events that makes Osik sound foolish, and Osik is not foolish. Osik is one of the most capable cadets in this facility. He has served with distinction on 3 simulation deployments, and his tactical assessment scores are consistently in the upper quartile. What Osik had not previously encountered was a cat. The Virani homeworld has no comparable organism. Virani prey animals are large, vocal, and fast. Virani predators are large, vocal, and faster. Nothing in Virani biology or cultural exposure prepared Osik for something small, silent, moving with that particular low-ground, purposeful flow that cats use when they are interested in something. The cat reached Osik's position in approximately 6 seconds. Osik stepped back. The cat continued forward. Osik stepped back again. The cat was not threatening him. It was, as I later understood, simply curious. But from Osik's sensory perspective, something small and quiet was advancing toward him in a pattern that matched no prey species and no known predator in his catalog, moving with an unnervingly focused intentionality. He stepped back a 3rd time. And while his attention was entirely consumed by this small black and white organism, Mara Voss completed the retrieval. The ring monitor called it. Drill complete, retrieval team wins. The whole room was quiet for a moment. Then Fosh said, in her standard issue completely flat voice, "Interesting approach." Mara Voss picked up the cat, tucked it back into her cuff, which was apparently structurally modified to function as a small climate-controlled carry pocket. I would learn later, and looked at Osik with an expression that I would eventually come to recognize as her version of apology. "She's harmless," she said. "I should have warned you." Osik looked at her, then looked at the cuff, then looked at me. I had absolutely no idea what to say. Part 2, Reckoning. Instructor Field Report, Academy Training Officer Instructor Fosh, Mullorian Female, Cathara Station. Filed for the Bureau of Interspecies Integration, Cross-Enrollment Division. The enrollment of Cadet Specialist Mara Voss into the Year 2 and above cohort at Cathara Academy presented a set of training management challenges that I want to document carefully, because I believe they have implications for future human enrollments. The first challenge was simple and easily managed: the cat. Cadet Voss carried a biological companion animal, species Felis catus, small domestic earth variant, with a registered emotional support and tactical utility designation, filed through the Human Cadet Support Provision Clause of the Galactic Union Species Accommodation Code. The clause had been invoked only twice in Cathara's history before her enrollment. The cat, named Spec by the cadet, was fully vaccinated, biosecurity certified for station environments, and had a registered behavioral classification of calm non-aggressive with the station veterinary authority. Spec was, by all formal measures, a non-issue. The informal measures were more complicated. Within the first week of Cadet Voss's active participation in training, I documented 11 separate incidents of training disruption attributable to cadet reactions to Spec's presence in the training environment. The disruptions were not aggressive or hostile, they were attentional. Cadets who had never previously lost focus during active drills were losing focus because Spec would occasionally emerge from her carry pocket or wander across a portion of the training ring during scenario resets. The Varani cadets were most affected. Varani sensory processing prioritizes small moving objects at low ground level, an evolutionary inheritance from their prey-tracking background, and Spec's movement pattern activated this processing almost involuntarily. 3 Varani cadets in the mid-tier cohort submitted formal concentration impairment reports within the first week. I reviewed the reports and found them genuine. The second challenge was more complex. Cadet Voss's tactical methodology was anomalous. She did not operate by the pattern of operations frameworks that the Academy's curriculum had spent decades refining and codifying. She operated by something that I can only describe as improvised coherence. She assessed each scenario as a unique problem rather than an instance of a known pattern, and she generated solutions that were, frequently, outside the expected solution set. This created assessment difficulties. Our scoring rubrics are calibrated to evaluate performance within established framework parameters. Cadet Voss's solutions were often technically correct. She achieved objectives. She protected assets. She completed missions, but her methods scored poorly on framework adherence metrics. I raised this with the Academy Directorate at the end of her first week. Director Orath, a Thessari of the old administrative school, reviewed my notes and said, "Adjust the rubric." I want to note that Orath had been director for 17 years and had never previously told me to adjust a rubric for an individual cadet. I adjusted the rubric. Personal log, Cadet Dren Valak continued. By the end of the second week, I had revised my assessment of Mara Voss approximately 4 times. First assessment, new enrollment with interesting background, probably mid-tier once Academy methodology caught up with her. Second assessment, operationally innovative, likely to score well in scenario-based metrics once she adapted to our framework. Third assessment, does not intend to adapt to our framework, is expecting our framework to accommodate her. Fourth assessment, the framework is accommodating her, and I do not know how I feel about that. I was still Cadet 13. My scores hadn't dropped. I want to be clear about that because the story gets told sometimes as though I immediately fell behind once she arrived, and that's not accurate. She didn't make me worse. She made me aware, which is a different thing and in some ways more disorienting. I was aware, specifically, of how I had been solving problems before she arrived. I had been solving problems the way I had been taught to solve problems. I was excellent at that. My drill times, my scenario scores, my assessment rankings, they were the product of understanding the pattern deeply and executing within it flawlessly. I was the best at the game because I had mastered the rules of the game. She didn't know the rules. Or she knew the rules, I came to understand, but she treated them as tools rather than constraints. She knew what was in the rulebook the way someone who has spent time in the field knows what's in the manual, as a starting point, not an end point. On the 9th day, Foch ran a multi-team extraction scenario. 8 cadets in 4 pairs, complex environment, a simulated station interior with partial lighting failure, 2 objective points, and 3 opposing cadets playing interference. I was team lead on one extraction unit. Mara Voss was team lead on the second. The standard play in that scenario was sequential. First unit takes objective A while second unit creates distraction. Then units switch for objective B. It was the play in literally every documented solution to that scenario in the Academy's case file archive. I ran it. My unit reached objective A in 3.1 minutes. Clean execution. Mara Voss did not run it. What she did instead, and I watched the replay 3 times afterward because I needed to understand it, was she sent her partner, a second-year dreen named Telek, to make noise at objective A, not reach it. Just make noise near it. Draw the interference cadets toward her position. Then she walked again. That slow, deliberate walking she did directly to objective B, which was now undefended because all 3 interference cadets had moved toward the noise. Both objectives secured simultaneously. Total time, 2.7 minutes. Foch called it. I stood at my completed objective and looked across the simulated station floor at Mara Voss standing at hers, and she had spec out of the pocket, just cradling the cat in one arm the way humans apparently do when they're satisfied, and she looked over at me. She said, "Good time on A." Not smug, not sharp, just acknowledgement. I said, "Your 2.7 is going to be the new benchmark." She looked slightly surprised, like she hadn't expected me to say that. 2.4 is probably achievable, she said, if the interference cadets are slower next run. And then Foch called the reset, and we went again. Dormitory log entry, Wing B, Cathara Station Academy, Day 11 of enrollment, Cadet Mara Voss. Note, dormitory wing logs are maintained as official administrative records. The following is a cadet-submitted personal notation filed under the Academy's optional reflective log provision. I don't usually write these. Frontier Guard didn't have optional reflective logs. Frontier Guard had mission reports and incident forms, and, if you were lucky, a 30-minute block of personal time in which you could stare at a wall or sleep, or, if you had company, talk to someone about something that had nothing to do with the work. I'm writing this one because Spec is asleep in the cuff pocket. I leave it open on the bunk when we're in quarters so she can go in and out as she likes. And it's quiet in the wing, and I've been running scenarios in my head for 4 hours, and I need to stop or I won't sleep. The Academy is strange. It's good, technically. The infrastructure is solid, the instructors know what they're doing, the scenario design is thoughtful, better than anything we had at Sector 9 by a significant margin. But it's strange in a way I've been trying to put my finger on. I think the strangeness is, everyone here is very good at being very good in exactly the way they've been trained to be very good. That sounds like a compliment, and partially it is, but there's something missing in it. In the field, the problem never looks the way it looks in the manual. The problem is always messier, or quieter, or coming from a direction you didn't account for. And the cadets here, even the good ones, and some of them are genuinely excellent, they solve training problems like they're solving training problems. Like they know there's a right answer somewhere in the rubric. The top-ranked one, Cadet 13, Dren Valak, the Thessari, he's something. I looked at his scores before I got here because I wanted to know what I was walking into. His numbers are remarkable across every category. He runs scenarios in times that I would have said were theoretically close to optimal. He also runs them exactly the same way each time. I noticed it during the second cycle of my first active training day. He was on the opposite team in the extraction scenario. I was watching him move, and I could predict where he was going to go before he went there. Not because he was slow, he's not slow, but because he was following a path. A very good path, a fast path, an almost optimal path, but a path that had been walked before. Field work breaks that habit. Field work teaches you that the best path this time has nothing to do with the best path last time, because the conditions are different every single time. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying I see a gap. I want to see what happens when he decides to step off the path. I think when that happens, if that happens, the gap between his Cadet 13 and whatever theoretical ceiling exists is going to get very interesting. Spec just shifted in the cuff pocket. She makes this small sound when she's adjusting position in her sleep. It's the sound that tells me everything is fine. Signing off. Part 3. The Weight of the Number. Personal Log. Cadet Dren Valak continued. I want to describe the week that changed things. Not dramatically. Not with a single dramatic moment. It changed things the way significant things usually change, quietly, then all at once. It was the 31st day of her enrollment. Foch had scheduled what the Academy calls a full house, a scenario event that pulls all active cadets into a single large-format training event and runs the whole facility simultaneously. Full houses happen 4 times per cycle. They're evaluated holistically rather than individually, which means your contribution to collective performance matters more than your individual score. They're also the scenarios the Academy submits to the Galactic Union's Officer Development Oversight Committee as demonstration of institutional effectiveness. This cycle's full house was a multi-point defense scenario, a simulated station sector under pressure from multiple simultaneous threat vectors, with 11 cadets assigned to defend 4 objective zones using limited resources and under communication blackout between zones. I was assigned command of the central hub. 4 cadets under my direct coordination, 4 objective zones to manage with 3 cadets each, and a communication blackout that meant I couldn't directly contact the zone commanders once the scenario started. Mara Voss was assigned zone commander at Objective 3. Zone 3 was the most isolated of the 4, positioned at the simulated sector's far edge, with 2 access routes, both of which were marked as threat approach vectors in the scenario setup. She had 2 cadets with her, a first-year Mulorian named Pelith and a second-year Varani named Sas. Pelith was, to put it charitably, unready. He was in the full house because first-years were required to participate in 1 per cycle regardless of readiness, and the scheduling hadn't given us a better option. Sas was competent, steady, not creative. And Mara Voss had spec. The scenario started. I lost contact with Zone 3 within the first 4 minutes, as designed. I was managing the central hub and 3 other zones, and I could not monitor what was happening at Objective 3. I knew Voss was there, and I knew the zone was being threatened on 2 vectors, and I made a command decision to focus my limited coordination capacity on Zones 1, 2, and 4. What happened at Zone 3 I learned afterward from Pelith's after-action report, and from Sas, and from Mara Voss's own log which she submitted to Foch at cycle end. Zone 3 came under simulated pressure from both access routes simultaneously within the first 6 minutes. Sas took position at Route 1. Mara Voss took position at Route 2. She positioned Pelith at the objective itself with instructions to protect the zone marker and not move from that position under any circumstances. You don't have to do anything, she told him, according to his after-action. You just have to be there, that's enough. Can you be there? Pelith confirmed he could be there. What she did at Route 2 was, she held. For 9 minutes, while Sas held Route 1 and Pelith held the objective, she held Route 2 against a simulated 3-unit pressure advance using a combination of the zone's designated resource loadout and terrain management, using the geometry of the simulated space to create channel bottlenecks rather than attempting direct confrontation with superior numbers. And then, and this is the part that everyone wanted to talk about afterward, she let them through. She made a deliberate choice to allow the simulated advance through Route 2, and routed them directly toward Pelith's position at the objective, where Pelith, a first-year Mulorian who had been told simply to be there, saw 3 simulated advance units entering from an unexpected direction, and had an absolute panic response that, in the simulation's mechanical logic, counted as full defensive resistance. Because Peleth panicked so thoroughly and completely that his defensive thrashing activated every available zone defense mechanism in a single burst, including several that experienced cadets never used because they were considered wasteful in the simulation's resource economy. Zone 3 held. Foch's after-action evaluation noted that Mara Voss had deliberately engineered Peleth's panic as a tactical resource. I had never, in 22 months of academy training, seen a cadet turn a first-year's fear response into a zone defense strategy. I thought about it for 3 days. Witness account, Cadet Osikpren continued. After the full house, things shifted. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I've heard people characterize it as a rivalry, and I don't think that's right. Or it's right in only the most technical sense. Dren did not become competitive with Mara Voss in the way that competition usually manifests. He didn't work harder specifically to beat her. What he did was, he started watching her the way she'd been watching everyone since she arrived. And when Dren Valak starts watching you with his full attention, it means something. He's not someone who distributes his attention carelessly. Normally, in training, he is looking at the task. When he started watching Mara Voss, he was looking at a problem. I was curious what kind of problem he decided she was. I asked him, about 2 weeks after the full house. We were in the recovery period after evening scenario assessment, sitting with our meal trays in the mess hall. Mara Voss was 3 tables away, eating alone, with Speck on the table next to her tray, which was a dormitory wing thing that technically wasn't permitted in the mess hall but which Foch had apparently decided to allow after the 6th time she'd been asked to enforce it, and had found it wasn't worth the administrative effort. What kind of problem? I asked him. He considered this for a long time. Long for him. Thessari process quickly, so when a Thessari is slow, it means they're being careful. The wrong framing kind, he said finally. Meaning I've been watching what she does and trying to understand it in terms of how I run scenarios. And that's why I can't understand it. Because it's not a variation of how I run scenarios. It's something else running alongside. He paused. Then, when she walked into the intake meeting, I was holding my secondary appendages out. He said this like a confession. I told him I had noticed. I registered her before I had any reason to, he said. Before she'd done anything, she looked around the room and I registered her. I've been trying to understand why. I told him the obvious answer. She is the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself, which makes it more noticeable, not less. She doesn't broadcast, and so everything you receive from her feels like it came directly rather than being transmitted. It's unusual. He nodded slowly. I want to run a scenario with her, not against her, with her. I thought about that, as a team. Yes. I pointed out that Foch didn't typically pair cadets by individual request. Pairings went through the board rotation system. I know, he said. I'm going to ask anyway. Personal log, Cadet Mara Voss, day 38 of enrollment. Cadet Valak asked to be paired with me for the upcoming strategic assessment block. He came and found me in the ring during the free practice period, which is an unusual time to approach someone, because free practice is considered personal training time and most cadets don't interrupt each other during it. I was running movement work, just footwork and positioning practice, no scenario attached, with Speck sitting on the ring divider wall watching the way she watches when she's following motion. He came to the ring edge and stood there for a moment, and I noticed him because Speck noticed him first. She turned and looked at him, which meant she'd already assessed him as non-threatening because she didn't shift her posture, she just looked. I stopped my movement work. He said, I want to run a scenario with you, as a coordinated team. not opposition side. I said, why? He said, because I want to see how the two approaches work in the same direction instead of against each other. I thought about that for a moment. I looked at him. He's very tall, the way all Thesauri are, and his secondary appendages were doing the thing I'd started to notice they did when he was uncertain, slightly extended, not all the way. I said, okay. He blinked. I think he'd prepared a longer argument. Okay, he said. Yes. I picked up Spec from the divider wall and settled her back in the pocket. Submit the pairing request to Foch. Tell her it's a cross-methodology integration trial. That's a legitimate framing for the request. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "You've already thought about working with me." It wasn't a question. He was putting something together. I said, "You were going to figure things out at some point. I thought it might be useful to be there when you did." I went back to my footwork practice. He submitted the pairing request that evening. Part 4, Fire Point. Instructor Field Report. Instructor Foch continued. I approved the cross-methodology integration pairing for Cadets Valak and Voss on day 39 of Voss's enrollment. I want to note, for the record, that I did not anticipate what would happen. I've been running training scenarios at Cathara for 11 years. I have watched excellent cadets, unusual cadets, challenging cadets, brilliant cadets, and everything in between. I have watched pairings succeed and fail, synergize and cancel each other out. I did not anticipate what I observed during the integration trial block. The pairing ran across 4 scenarios over 2 days. I will summarize each. Scenario 1. A standard extraction mission with time pressure and limited resource loadout. I ran it expecting to see the typical coordination friction of 2 high-performing cadets with different methodological backgrounds learning to work together, usually inefficient early, improving gradually. They completed it on first run in 2.1 minutes. The previous best time for that scenario, held by Cadet Valak in solo command mode, was 3.4 minutes. I ran it again the same day, with modified obstacle parameters. 1.8 minutes. Scenario 2. Multi-objective defense under split communication conditions. This scenario typically requires 8 to 11 cadets for adequate coverage. I assigned them as a 2-person team as a stress test. They held 6 of 7 objectives. The 7th required a 3rd cadet, which I provided at the halfway mark. 7 of 7 held. Scenario 3. An adversarial scenario where the pair served as opposition to a 6-cadet team. The 6-cadet team included 4 Year 3 cadets with above-average assessment scores. The 6-cadet team did not complete their objective. The adversarial team, Valak and Voss, held them for the full scenario duration without activating emergency resource provisions. At one point, Cadet Voss released Spec into the scenario environment. The cat walked through the 6-cadet team's left flank formation. 3 of the 4 cadets holding the left flank lost positional focus for a combined 11 seconds. Cadet Valak used those 11 seconds to reposition to the secondary hardpoint and establish effective zone control. I have reviewed the footage 17 times. I still find it remarkable. Scenario 4 was the one I want to document in detail. I designed Scenario 4 specifically for this trial. I used parameters I had never previously applied in academy training because I had never had a reason to. They were too complex for standard cohort deployment. The scenario was drawn from the Union Tactical Archives, Extreme Condition, Classification, a multi-stage, multi-environment crisis scenario with cascading failure conditions, limited resource economy, communication blackout, and a time constraint set at what the archive classified as theoretical minimum viable. Theoretical minimum viable means the scenario was designed to be completable in theory. In the archive's documented history, No training team had successfully completed the scenario in under 4 hours using its minimum viable time constraint. The minimum viable time constraint was 4 hours. I gave Valak and Voss 4 hours and 15 minutes. The extra 15 was margin for learning curve. They completed it in 3 hours, 42 minutes. When I looked at the replay, I spent 2 hours trying to identify the moments where the approach was reproducible in a teachable framework. I found 11 discrete moments where Valak's pattern-based execution was deployed with a precision and efficiency I would have called optimal by any previous standard. I found 17 moments where Voss did something that my training frameworks had no category for. And I found, this is the part that I keep returning to, I found 23 moments where the two of them had made a decision together that neither of them, individually, would have made. Moments where his pattern depth and her outside frame thinking had generated a third option that was more efficient than either approach alone. I submitted a supplemental report to Director Orath the following morning. Orath read it and said, "Adjust the curriculum." In 17 years, Orath had never told me to adjust the curriculum. I adjusted the curriculum. Personal log, Cadet Dren Valak, Day 41 of enrollment. I'm going to try to describe what it felt like to run scenarios with her. I've been avoiding writing this because it's hard to describe clearly, and I'm a person who prefers clarity. Thesari have a cultural relationship with precision that is, it's deep. We build architectural lattices in our primary cities using tolerances measured in fractions of a micrometer. We speak in a language that has 47 grammatical cases because we care that much about the exact relational meaning of things. So when I say this is hard to describe clearly, I mean that in a particular way. It felt like running a calculation and then someone next to you gives you a variable you hadn't included, and when you put it in, the calculation doesn't change to a different answer. It becomes a different kind of calculation, one with more dimensions. When I run a scenario, I process the space as a geometric and probabilistic field. I know where the threats are, I know where the objectives are, I know the optimal paths between them, and I know the probability distributions of the interference variables. I run the numbers and I generate the best path. Then I run the best path. Mara Voss does not run numbers that way. She runs reading. She reads the space like it's a document. She notices things that don't fit the expected pattern and treats them as information rather than noise. Together, what happens is, my calculation is running the field as a defined problem space, and she is adding information from outside the problem space's defined edges, and the combination produces a solution set that is larger than either of us generates alone. There's also spec. I want to address spec directly, as a tactical consideration, because I've heard people dismiss it as a gimmick, and I want to be very clear that it is not a gimmick. The cat is a precision tool. Spec does not threaten. Spec does not perform. Spec moves through space with a particular intentionality that no other organism I've encountered replicates, because Spec has no tactical agenda. Spec is genuinely simply interested in whatever she's walking toward. And that genuine interest, that total absence of tactical calculation, is exactly what makes her presence disruptive to species with threat assessment instincts calibrated for organic opponents. Your instincts say, that small thing is moving toward me with focus and purpose. Your threat assessment looks for the pattern. The pattern doesn't fit anything in your catalog. You spend 8 to 12 seconds processing it. In 8 to 12 seconds, Dren Valak can cross 32 meters of open scenario floor and establish position at 2 hardpoints. Spec is not a gimmick. Spec is a legitimate tactical asset that happens to also be a small mammal who enjoys sitting in a warm pocket and occasionally bumping her head against your hand. I've started feeding her in the mornings. Mara showed me what she eats. Spec sits on the ring divider now when we do morning calibration, and she watches drills, and she has a very specific look she gives me when I make a mistake. I find it more motivating than I expected.